Hello there, snooping as usual, I see. Today, I'm going to talk about Hazbin Hotel and all of its writing failures, because when that show got its premiere, or rather, not all of its writing failures, there are way too many to cover in one video on a coherent time, but just the four main ones. So, Hazbin Hotel, when the show premiered, or rather when it got its pilot, a lot of people had a lot of hopes for it, which were promptly dashed upon season 1, or if not that, during season 2. Some people still like it, but its flaws are very, very clear. And honestly, I want to do a whole series on rewriting it, or at least giving some suggestions of how each episode could have been improved. But in order to do that, I think I first need to address the writing flaws that are pervasive throughout it, the biggest ones. And even if I, don't end up doing this series, hey, good for a single video. So, there are four main writing flaws. I'll go after the last two of them. Sorry, I'm grouping the last two together because they're kind of connected. So, but first, writing flaw 1 is the lack of consistency. And by that, I mean, now keep in mind these are overarching flaws that show up in multiple places, but anyway, with the lack of consistency, I mean the lack of moral consistency. So, to put it in simple terms, some acts of atrocities and horrible stuff that happens are treated as comedy, and others are treated as being, well, horrible atrocities. And this isn't really... Okay, so this... Whether or not an act is treated as horrible tends to depend on what character it happens to, and whether or not it's played for humor or it's depicted seriously. So, the atrocity... So, now, there are a few, levels to it, and this kind of makes the series inconsistent. The tone's inconsistent of the overall series in general, and this does not help matters. So, the series wants to be both a lighthearted comedy and something that is far more serious and deep. And you can pull that off, but you have to be a really good writer to do it. If you don't pull it off the right way, there are three main things that can happen. One is a comedy series can stray into becoming serious. This is called Cerberus syndrome, and sometimes it's done intentionally, but even then it's difficult to pull off intentionally. Most of the time it's just its tone changing over time. There's also the opposite that can happen. A series can become silly enough that you can't take the serious moments seriously. And then there's the in-between ground that happened to Hazbin Hotel, and it's basically become a bit of a muddle where it's just inconsistent. But, yeah, you can have a comedy series that also has some serious, deeper tones, or the reverse, a serious series with more comedic moments. But you need to be really good at writing to mix the tones, and I don't think that's something beginning writers like, obviously, VisiPop can pull off. Or at least not easily. So, in any case, the atrocities that are depicted as comedic and are serious, it tends to vary based on whether the atrocity is supposed to be funny in the exact moment, or whether it's happening to the butt monkey character or not. Now, there is a way you can pull off atrocities being seen as comedy in some cases and serious in others, and the most common and obvious way to do it is to make the character who it happens to deserve it. There's a reason why the unsympathetic comedic protagonist trope exists, because comedies are generally about really bad things happening to people. And if something bad happens to someone who deserves it, it's funny rather than tragic. Take Beavis and Butthead. Beavis and Butthead are stupid assholes. That's why when stupid and bad stuff happens to them, it's funny. Now, you could say that every character in the series, or at least every one of the central characters, deserves it because they're in hell, so they must have done something to get themselves down there. But the issue is that if they all deserve it, then it should be treated as funny with all of them because they're all in hell, they all deserve it, but it isn't. It's inconsistent. And that really hurts the show's greater messaging regarding redemption, which I'll get to in the second point. But anyway, yeah, this inconsistency just doesn't work to the show's favor. It makes it come off as schizophrenic rather than making it a blend of comedy and more serious elements. If you want a good example of that being pulled off, but not to the extent Hazbin Hotel wants it to, you should probably look at Dragon Ball Z Abridged. If you want another example of it pulled off better, look at Scrubs. Now, I have a lot of problems with Scrubs as a series, but it's really good at pulling this off, I will admit. You could also look at Scissors 7 for a sort of example of it, though in that case it's more starting off comedy than moving into serious things, but fully intentionally in its case. Now, moving on to point 2. Hazbin Hotel is safe edgy, though this point could perhaps better be seen as the show has a lack of maturity. Like, it wants to go edgy. It wants to be the edgelord show set in hell, but it isn't going all the way. Like, the violence and gore in it aren't usually all that realistic. They're more cartoonish, for one thing. Though, at this point, with all gore isn't really all that edgy, though it is to an extent. But it still isn't going necessarily all the way in that regard. And it doesn't go all the way in other regards either. And look, I'll just be blunt about it. Making fun of Christianity hasn't been edgy since the mid-2000s. Christianity is the religion that's the butt of every joke about religion, even when they're talking about the parts of it that come from Judaism. So, if you really wanted to be edgy, you would make fun of, say, Islam. Or if you want to be edgy without getting your house blown up, you'd make fun of Judaism. Or, if not that, some other religion that is still around, because, like, making fun of mythology isn't all that edgy either. Come on, it's not like some worshiper of Zeus is gonna complain about you're making fun of him. So, making fun of Christianity isn't edgy, though Hazbin Hotel is also a very poor critique of Christianity if it was intended as it, which I think it was. And we'll get more on this in the world-building stuff, but to put it simply, the system of Hazbin Hotel doesn't really resemble anything connected to any main branch of Christianity aside from very vaguely of heaven and hell being a thing and having angels and demons. Like, the main reasons why are because God doesn't exist in the Hellverse. They replaced him with the angels, so presumably anything that happened in the Bible connected to the God was done by the angels instead. And as another note, we don't know if Jesus exists or if he doesn't in the Hellverse. So God and Jesus are the central figures of Christianity. Pretty much every branch of Christianity revolves around them, or has something to do with them at the very least. No exceptions. Or at least no exceptions that I know of. I say there might be some weird branch, but generally speaking, these are all, like, God and Jesus are the central figures of Christianity. So, if you don't include one or both of them in a parody of Christianity, you can't exactly say it's Christian, and the morality the angels exhibit, or that seems to get you into heaven in it, isn't anything in line with Christian morality. Or at least it's that's a boring way to put it. It seems to be like that sacrificing yourself is a way to get into heaven, which is in line with Christian morality, but there also are complete assholes like Adam, who are in the series, at least Adam as he's depicted in Hazbin Hotel, who get into heaven. So, as a result of that, you don't really, the series never explains how to get into heaven, because Adam obviously didn't sacrifice himself, and there are lots of people in heaven who didn't sacrifice themselves to get there, so there clearly are other ways. So, basically, this isn't really a criticism of Christianity. It tries to be, but it fails hard at that. Now, to go over something else related being safe edgy, the show takes place in hell, and I can understand them not using any real people who actually existed for this, aside from St. Peter, which is weird, but we'll get into that more later, and why it's weird that he's there. what sort of sins do the people who end up in the hotel commit? Like, one of them was a prostitute, if I remember right. I think another one might have done a murder. Serpentius was a gangster, which is all, like, standard stuff, but they don't really go into all the stuff and reasons why they end up in hell, or have anyone who's they really portray as really serious monster, aside from a few of the antagonists. And this is a series that really wants to do mature, like, they don't have any serial killers in the hotel, or, hell, like, pretty much anyone who committed rape in life is an antagonist and irredeemable in the show. There also is no one who's, like, committed genocide or did any truly, truly horrible, evil stuff who is seeking redemption. When this show wants to ask big questions about things like redemption, but isn't mature enough to truly go all the way. Like, to give an example, let's say in the hotel you have someone who was a mass-murdering dictator who killed millions of people, and he realized that what he did was wrong, and he wants redemption, not to get into heaven, but to truly make up for what he did. Can someone like this be redeemed? Is it possible if they genuinely want to make up for what they did, or are their sins too great? Or, for example, let's say that a serial killer ends up in the hotel, but this was a mission-based serial killer who thought he was doing the right thing. Like, he thought the people he killed all deserved it, and he's trying to figure out why he ended up in hell when he thinks he should be in heaven. Can you redeem someone like that? Someone who is too insane to realize that what they did was wrong? Even if their sins aren't as great as the dictator at least knows that what he did was evil. The serial killer can't comprehend it. Or maybe he can, but it would take a while to get them there. Those are the sort of questions that a show like this is warranted to ask. And also, the questions about free will, like, Satan is depicted as basically a misunderstood artist who gave humanity free will. How does he feel about it now? How does he feel about it now that he's surrounded by the worst scum of humanity? Does he think giving humanity free will was a good thing still, or does he think it was a mistake? What about the angels? Do they think humanity as free will was a mistake, or do they actually like it now? Because they're surrounded by the best of humanity, or have they seen enough of Earth to have mixed opinions on it? Like, we don't get perspectives on this in a series that, quite frankly, was kind of wanted to be about these greater philosophical themes, but never went the full way. And I don't think it would go the full way, aside from the writer's seeming mental attitudes. There also is the whole political attitudes. I don't want to go into politics too deeply on this show, but this show has very much progressive politics, and under progressivism, certain sins are just irredeemable. Like, a rapist or someone who commits sexual harassment can never be redeemed. But the show could still talk about things like redemption, while also doing it from a progressive framework. Like, maybe go into why certain sins are irredeemable and why certain ones aren't. Like the dictator who committed genocide, maybe he just did too great to ever be redeemed, but perhaps someone from a lesser sin could be. The show doesn't really go into all of this, and I'm going to go into the next 2 points now because they're connected to this. These are fanfiction-based writing, point 3, and 4 are lack of world building. Now, the fanfiction-based writing, I first came to realize from an explanation that I found in a comment on Random Film Talks. I'll put a screenshot of it right now. So, anyway, I'll go into it and talk a bit about myself. So, I am a writer, among other things. I wrote the book Accountant Isekai, which is on Amazon, and also I have a few successful series on Royal Road, including including Re-Shattered Memories. So I have a lot of experience with writing, and I did write fan fiction before I did more professional writing on Royal Road, and in fact, not wanting to write fan fiction anymore is why I switched to doing more professional stuff and started writing on Royal Road. Because when you're writing fan fiction, and I think this is one of the reasons why a lot of fan fictions never finish, you're not writing your own story. You're writing your version of someone else's story. And some people can do that just fine, but kind of grates on you eventually. But while the fanfiction I wrote are, in my opinion, stupid these days, like, you really do end up hating your earlier works, I'm glad that I wrote them because it allowed me to learn from the mistakes I made and become a better writer overall. So there are two aspects of fanfiction writing that I think really affect Hazbin Hotel negatively. One of them is legitimate just bad writing, the other is something that applies to the nature of fanfiction and goes hand in hand with point 4. So first off, there's this thing in fanfiction that a lot of writers, myself included when I really started on it, was, okay, it's basically throwing cool stuff at the wall because it sounds cool to do, and it ends up hurting the story later down the line. I'll give you an example of this from a TV show, The Flash. So one of the biggest problems with CW's The Flash, that is a sort of fan fiction writing, is that The Flash, his super speed is constantly shown off, and he's shown to be ridiculously fast. Fast enough to, like, search a city in a few seconds. And then they have him fight normal guys who really should get knocked out in less than a second when fighting The Flash. They do the whole showing off super speed because it looks cool, but they don't establish hard limits that would make these people a challenge for the Flash to deal with. Hazbin Hotel is like a bit like that, but not necessarily in terms of the cool stuff spectacle thing of the Flash. It's more like, hey, wouldn't this be cool if this character did this or said this, etc. And in the long run, this stuff hurts the story badly. Which is why you need to think very carefully about these things, and frankly, this story really needed some more veteran writers, not just someone who this was their first writing project. Anyway, the other fanfiction one is related to the next point, a lack of world building. So, I'm going to just condense those into two, but first off, I want to talk about the nature of world building in stories. There are lots of channels on YouTube that talk about great world building, what it is, what world building your story should have, and I'm going to be blatantly honest here. Just because a story has poor world building doesn't mean that the world building is going to ruin the story, or the story isn't going to be successful, or isn't going to be beloved. Like, okay, so when people bring up bad world building in like stories, they often bring up Harry Potter and Skyrim. And I agree that those have bad world building. Or at least, they don't have very good world building. Not necessarily bad, but maybe not very good. Your mileage can vary. However, I would like to point out that Skyrim and the Harry Potter series were wildly successful despite the world building. Now, I'm not saying that stories shouldn't have good world building, or that good world building cannot enhance a story. When you, like, to give an example, Avatar: The Last Airbender, that is some of the best world building I've ever seen. Like, it's really good. Or in the original series, not so much in Korra, but the original series had really good world building. And it is a very good example of many of the things the building a fantasy world people on YouTube talk about, and I'm going to do my own world building series at some point. But the world building itself enhances the story. So, alright, so what is the truth about what world building your story should have? Well, quite frankly, the better world building your story has, the more it will enhance a story. But a story only needs good world building up to a certain point. World building by itself will not sell your story. Like, it can help sell it, it can enhance it, but your story needs other stuff, even if it has great world building. Like, without a compelling plot, interesting characters, or just a sense of wonder in the case of Harry Potter, though it does have a good plot and characters, too, and Skyrim has all sorts of gameplay features and story elements that people like about it. But those are the main drives there. The world building is basically just there to convey those things, and it's just enough that it makes sense when you don't look at it too much. Now, on the other hand, Avatar, it has great world building, and that enhances it and its characters, which are already the plot characters of Avatar: The Last Airbender are great, and the world building enhances this stuff. But without that stuff, the world building wouldn't matter. You could have the world's best world building, but if your story's crap, your characters aren't very good, no one's going to buy your story. Like, good world building can only go so far. Bad world building, however, if it's bad enough, can ruin a story. So, what world building do you need? This is the question. The answer is, you need enough world building that the audience believes the world exists and isn't constantly scratching their head. I think the best way to put it is the world building cannot take the audience out of the story or leave important stuff unexplained. And here's where we bring it back to the world building can't have anything that's head scratching enough that the audience is taken out of the story right away. And if there's something important that needs to be explained, it can't be unexplained. Now, here's where we bring it back to fan fiction. To put it in simple terms, fan fiction requires less world building than various other pieces of medium. The reason is that fan fiction assumes that the audience is already someone who enjoys whatever medium it's based on. So, for example, if you're writing, let's say you're writing a Batman movie. No, Batman's a bad example. He's so well known that pretty much everyone knows his origin story. I'm pretty sure even the South Sentinel, or wait, is it North? I'm pretty sure even the people on North Sentinel Island know who Batman is and know his backstory. Okay, so let's say that you're writing a Fate. Let's say that you're writing a Fate fan fiction about the Fate series. It's going to be assumed that most of the people who read your Fate series fan fiction are fans of the series and already know the basics. So if you're writing a story involving a Holy Grail war, you don't need to explain what a Holy Grail war is. Or let's say you have a story with Shiro Emiya as the main character of the fan fiction. You don't need to explain who he is, what his backstory is, what his ideals are. Now, on the other hand, if you were, say, adapting Fate Stay Night into an anime or a movie, you would need to explain that stuff. Now, where fanfictions do need to do world building is if they introduce a new scenario or a new character that doesn't exist in the original work. Like, let's say you're writing a Fate fanfiction involving a Holy Grail war, and the main character is a mage that you made up. You need to explain them and their backstory there, as well as where they come from. Or let's say the Holy Grail War takes place in Mew. I don't think Fate's featured Mew yet, so you have to explain what Mew is, where it's at, where it's in the world, or if there's a new servant class, you need to explain that, etc. Basically, in a fan fiction, world building can be bare minimum, unless you're introducing characters and elements that weren't in it before, in which case there needs to be more extensive world building. And Hazbin Hotel, watching it feels like you're watching an animated fan fiction of another series that already exists. Because the series expects you to understand a lot of stuff, like how hell works is a big one. Like, with all the circles and, honestly, it's all just a big city, which is kind of boring, but moving aside from that, it expects you to understand a lot of stuff, including a big one, how Charlie can be so naive. Now, Charlie is 200 years old and has spent her entire life in hell, as far as we can tell, and she's somehow incredibly naive. That is impossible, unless you have a very good explanation for it. Like, what, was Satan just locking her away in her house in her room for 200 years, keeping her from leaving the palace for 200 years? Like, unless you explain that they, like, demons, because they don't age or immortal or whatever, perceive time differently than humans do, and 200 years isn't considered all that long for them. but if that is the case, the show doesn't explain it. Like, there's a lot of stuff that just aren't explained, and if you want explanation, you need to go on to VisiPop's personal blog or some other thing for it, which is not good at all. All the world building within a series should be in the series itself. You shouldn't have to go to something that's outside of the series to understand it. And Alright, so that covers information the audience doesn't need to know, and to give another example of it, they don't explain how someone gets into heaven or why the angels don't know how someone gets into heaven. Look, the angels presumably are unaging and immortal, unless someone kills them. And that means that the oldest angels were there since before creation. They've had thousands of years to observe who gets into heaven and who gets into hell. So how do they not know it? This is something that needs to be explained because they should at least know it based on physical evidence. Also, I'd like to remind you that God does not exist in the Hellverse. So the angels are the ones who created the world. And this includes heaven and hell. They created the afterlives, and they must have created the system that brings people to the afterlife. So, how do they not know how it works? Like, how do they not know who goes to heaven, who goes to hell? Like, this would basically be the equivalent of someone making a car, and then you ask them why, when you turn the ignition, the car starts, they go, I have no idea. The mere act of making the car should do it, unless there's some in-universe explanation as to why it doesn't. But this isn't explained, which just causes it to be a massive head-scratcher. And moving on to that, I think I'm going to give my favorite minor example of a head-scratcher, because, there are many head-scratchers in this series that break the audience's immersion, like the angels not understanding how the heaven-hell system works despite being the ones who made it. And this is one that I think I might be the only person who brought up, but I'm going to now because this is a massive head-scratcher when you think about the world building. So, St. Peter is the one who's at the pearly gates in Hazbin Hotel, which is how he's typically depicted in Christianity, which is probably the only reason why he's there. Because him being there doesn't make any sense in universe, or at least if it's a big question of why is he there. So, why in Christianity is St. Peter often depicted as the one at the pearly gates? Well, in simple terms, he is someone very important to Christianity. He was one of Jesus' disciples. In fact, one of his apostles, who were his top disciples. And in Catholic tradition, St. Peter was also the first pope, which is one of the most, well, actually, in the mortal plane, I suppose you could put it, the Pope is the most important person in Catholicism, outside of course, people like Jesus, God, etc. Like, the person in the mortal world who is most important is the Pope, so St. Peter is a pretty big deal in Christianity. But him being here has a few questions. So, Jesus in Christianity is the Son of God. So, God doesn't exist in the Hellverse. Does Jesus not exist either? Because, in most branches of Christianity, Jesus isn't just the Son of God, he is God. So, does he just not exist in the Hellverse? Or if he does exist, is he a half-angel and not the Son of God? And if he's a half-angel, what sort of does that give him all the abilities in the Bible? Because we don't really see angels using any Jesus powers in the series. And if he is half angel, which angel is his parent? Which errant? That's a big question. And I guess that means the virgin birth thing didn't happen, but why didn't Jesus show up if he does exist? Jesus' whole thing is redeeming sinners. So when there's Hazbin Hotel trying to redeem sinners who are in hell, you'd think Jesus would have something to say about it. Positive or negative, he'd at least have to say something. Especially since in some Christian traditions, Jesus went into hell after he died to take some people who went there but couldn't get into heaven because he hadn't sacrificed himself yet and bring them out of hell. In essence, Jesus went into a rescue mission to redeem some people in hell. So that could potentially be used as precedent for why Charlie thinks the hotel thing could work. Like, if Jesus did it, maybe it can be repeated. Now, on the alternative, what if Jesus doesn't exist in the Hellverse? Alright, if he doesn't exist, then who the fuck is St. Peter? What did he do that was so significant that the angels would put him in charge of the gates of heaven? Like that's a small thing that stems from this very non-traditional depiction of Christianity. And just starts going on from there. The series' world building is crap, and it really negatively impacts it. So there you have it. The 4 aspects of Hazbin Hotel that I think are really what brings the show down in terms of writing. The fact that it doesn't have good world building, like its world building is absolutely crap and keeps bringing you out of the story both on major and minor levels. The lack of substance, maturity, and it being safe edgy. The fact that it feels like a fan fiction of something that already exists rather than its own independent piece of media, which is what it needs to be. And the whole... and the inconsistency and, quite frankly, hypocrisy of the show in terms of which sins are redeemable, which aren't, and also because that stuff needs to be explained. The way that fell under world building. Okay, so, and the inconsistency of which sins are bad and depicted as horrifying, and which are used as comedy. And also the fact that Vizzy-Pop denies that scene with Serpentius' rape after he says, please no, don't bring me there, and tries to drag himself out. Does Vizzy-Pop not believe that consent can be withdrawn? Or does she not believe that consent can be withdrawn when it happens to the comedic relief characters? Because not thinking that consent can be withdrawn, that's kind of a big red flag for progressives, isn't it? Or honestly, just about anyone. If you're saying, but yeah, so there you have it. Thank you for watching, everyone, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe.